The conference. What happened at the conference? What was your experience?
It was a very good experience. We had the opportunity to speak to many people within the scientific community. Lots of scientists and transdisciplinary areas, people involved in law, energy, soils, oceanographers. There are all kinds of different people represented there, all to do with climate change. So we had a great opportunity to share our information and engage in lots of meaningful conversations. Sometimes compromising conversations. You know, like for example, I was asking a chap from the Tyndall Centre, which is the UK Climate Research Centre from the University of Anglia.
East Anglia, which are now quite famous.
They are, well, almost infamous really,
infamous.
because they were involved in 2 Climategate scandals where thousands of emails were hacked and leaked to the public about the scientists trying to hide the fact there had been no global warming and explaining the various tricks that were used by people like Michael Mann, who's like infamous about his hockey stick, which so other scientists are claiming is fraudulent.
And weren't they one of the primary sources that the IPCC used for their climate models?
Well, the hockey stick was a very popular one with them because it was very alarmist. It took completely inaccurate with observed data. The data was homogenized and altered so that it would basically, you could almost put in any data to the same model and it will come out with the same hockey shape.
And in fact, I remember the source code for their calculations was also leaked, and that was shown to prove that no matter what you put in, it would also say, "Oh, we're all going to die from global warming. We'll have these massive increases." So that was also
So essentially, I caught up with one of these guys from the Climate Research Centre, and I asked him quite a simple question. I said that, owing to the fact that Climategate revealed that there was a global warming pause, how long should the pause continue before you begin to reassess your understanding about the anthropogenic global warming theory? I.e., if the pause continues, can we then suggest that maybe CO2 doesn't drive climate? And he was incredibly uncomfortable, said to me, tried to refer me to the IPCC report, and said that our scientists have been working to the highest standards, and basically did not answer my question, which was incredible really. And after he procrastinated for a while, and I said to him, so can you give me a figure? So I've already answered that question, so with a non-answer, with just going and look it up in the IPCC. So it was interesting to kind of compromise these people and find myself in a situation where these people were not willing to actually answer questions. By deferring, like political tricks, really, which to me, it's like if these people are open and above board, they surely must have considered the possibility, if their theory about anthropogenic global warming is incorrect, how long would the pause need to be to demonstrate that potentially they might have got it wrong? You know, so they're scientists, things go wrong, theories aren't always correct, and so they surely must be aware that they need to have a potential time scale where they would reassess the theory, but they're not willing to even give you a figure, which I find very, very dishonourable, really.
Well, the basis of science is you come up with a theory, you collect data and see if the data matches your theory, and if it can be repeated, then you publish, and then people can decide whether it has any merit. And it doesn't seem to be the model there. And the word model is, well,
the thing's based on models, isn't it? That's what we've realised. Though everything they use for their horrific predictions of alarm and, oh my God, we've got a climate crisis, we must take climate action. It's all based on these very, very faulty models. Because we know, we can say with confidence that the models are inaccurate because they don't encompass all the aspects of what goes into our climate, into our atmosphere.
Like the sun?
Yes, that's not included. The activity of the sun's not included. They don't include all the vast weather modification programs that are going on all around the world. 42 nations have full-time weather modifications. There are hundreds of independent weather modification companies, and collectively this is a wide-scale weather modification program going on all around the world, let alone the effects of the ice crystals from contrails falling down and seeding lower cloud decks. We've seen a massive increase in clouds, so much so that we've got a phenomenon known as global dimming.
Yeah.
You know, where it's been measured and quantified now that we are receiving less sunlight than we used to. And you know, I think we can attribute that to aviation, because when planes were grounded in the past following 9/11 and 2010 in the UK following the volcano eruption in Iceland, and there was another incident somewhere in Australia, the planes were grounded. In each and every case, the clouds disappeared, the skies became blue, the aerosols went wherever they were going, but basically you can see a correlation between the effects of aviation and a cloudy sky. Basically, when there's lots of planes flying, it's going to be cloudy. You know, it's these things are not taken into account. The effect of the clouds generated from these contrails has been deliberately underplayed. Yet you've got scientists like Oliver Boucher now suggesting that perhaps there's been much more global warming from contrails and contrail cirrus clouds than the CO2 that's been emitted from the planes. So what he's suggesting now is actually maybe we ought to look at the aviation industry, because they may have played a larger part in global warming. But I would like to interject at this point. Overall, our planet has warmed just 0.8 of 1 degree since 1850. We've had lots of warmer periods in the past. Warm has never been devastating to the planet in the past. In fact, every historical time when we've had a warm period, mankind has flourished. So it's a really, really bizarre claim that we should be in alarm about a warmer period, because everything grows better. It's a much better time. But what they're actually doing now is saying this global warming period will create extremes of weather. And this is where we're concerned, because these extremes of weather can be manufactured using the weather modification techniques that resulted in the fact that when they were being used in Vietnam for warfare purposes, the upshot of after all the denials, and it eventually did come out that they were using weather modification, able to extend the monsoon season by 60 days, there was an uproar. And Senator Claiborne Pell and the Soviets at the time petitioned the United Nations to create a treaty so that weather modification could not be used for warfare purposes, called the ENMOD Treaty. Now, if you consider that they wanted to have this treaty in place because of the abuse of weather modification techniques, isn't that confirmation that weather modification does indeed work? Otherwise, it'd be a fruitless time. Why have a treaty?
It's also a very big industry, because didn't you read today?
90 billion.
90 billion.
Yes,
90 billion.
we did read
And that's
today.
an annual expense in the United States alone.
Yeah.
And David Keith did a study with Aurora Flight Sciences, and
For his geoengineering
thing, which was he mentioned this at the AAS conference in February 2010, and he said that or the report from Aurora Flight Sciences showed that you could put 50 million
50 megatons
50 million tons of albedo modification material, which was unspecified, for 8 billion. So
I thought it was even less, but it's 6 billion. But yeah,
so it was up to 8 billion.
Yeah.
So
which, as David Keith said, it's cheap.
Yeah. So 10 times that is as much as that's the cost in the United States alone right now.
Yeah,
for the public stuff.
Weather modification is very real, even though some climate scientists will underplay it.
Yeah.
They don't use the effects of these weather modification programs in their models. Mm-hmm. So the models are skewed. They're not accurate. They're only accurate between very small boundaries.
Yeah.
It's it's data in or garbage in, garbage out.
And they've all the previous models that they've produced have all failed.
Yeah, that's true.
But they haven't got one right yet.
Yeah, that's
so why
true.
should we believe this whatever the current one is.
Well, they said that the Arctic was going to be ice-free in 2013.
And there was going to be the end of ice back in 2000. Yeah. There was going to be no more snow.
And what have we actually seen? We've seen the Arctic sea ice expanding again, almost back to 1981 size. So, there's...
brutal winters for several years. And in fact, I just heard today that Australia's having its worst winter for
50 years
50
or something.
years,
yeah. Snow in places where they've not had snow for 50 years.
Yeah.
So, it's really cherry-picking data. That's what they do. They homogenise data. They take it from... they don't give a true representation of global temperatures. They're just at limited places. Some of those places where the data collecting places may be could be in the centre of a city or an airport where the temperature is not reflective of what the actual ambient temperature is. It's in a specific location where it might not give a true
or right
reflection.
Beside an air conditioning outflow where it's getting blasting hot air.
So there's many examples where we know that the data collecting is dubious. We know that they homogenise data. They actually do statistical tricks to misrepresent the data. Basically, the observed data does not correlate with their statistical data, which is a typical thing with statistics, and obviously the models reflect that. And it's I don't think you could be making UN treaties and making 500 new climate laws for 2015 with 66 nations based on models that don't work.
Yeah. Because there is an agenda which has been set since the Club of Rome mentioned it back in...
late 60s, the Club of Rome came into existence in 1967 with the sole purpose of
global governance,
working towards one world government. And they particularly have an interest in using climate change as their vehicle to get this one world government that
and they published it and they said global warming would fit the bill.
When searching for an idea to unite humanity, we hit upon the idea of pollution, shortages of water, and the threat of global warming. That would fit the bill, because all of those actions are done by human intervention, and therefore they can say that humanity is the enemy itself. So they can then
enemy
take drastic
them,
action.
perhaps.
Well, they can even say it's a national security matter. They could say mankind's a danger to our nation, so it's a national security matter. Then you can get CIA involved in funding geoengineering projects.
Probably.
And the CIA have been involved with weather modification for many decades. There's evidence of them doing covert weather modification programs from Thailand in 1963. Before the beginning of Operation Popeye. So we know that the CIA, is an agency of the government. The government obviously think weather modification works, and they have been using it as a geopolitical weapon. As the Johnson administration was not only involved with Project Popeye, they were using weather modification for political leverage, geopolitical reasons in India and Pakistan. So they obviously think it works. They've invested a lot of money. They then went on to set up NOAA and the National Science Foundation and all these prestigious organisations that are giving us all the fear now about global warming and climate change. Well, they were set up at a time when basically the US and their allies, and even Soviets and Chinese and many different nations around the world, were looking to implement a large-scale weather and climate modification program. It was recommended in the 60s, and they decided it would be good to set up these geophysical sciences so that they could further explore the atmosphere, the oceans, because the oceans are important because of directing currents, because if you can shift the currents, then you might be able to warm the Arctic waters. And what this is actually really pointing to is everyone really ought to do their research about what the Soviets and what the US and their allies wanted to do to the polar basin in the Arctic region. What they wanted to do from the 40s, 50s and 60s and even into the 70s was deliberately warm the polar region with a view to getting rid of all of the sea ice in the Arctic. That was their goal for decades and decades. And if you go back to those historical documents and you realise the organisations involved like RAND, Corporation and National Science Foundation, you begin to realise that there was a very, very strategic reason for doing this, and that was to get the shipping lanes, because of the way that the planet is made. The shipping routes are really hampered with the Americas, and they have to go through the Panama Canal. So if they could get access to the Arctic, obviously that would be great for shipping lanes. Then you've got all the untapped resources. You've got huge tracts of land, like the largest island in the world, Greenland, with untapped, with gold, oil, and uranium, and all the things they want to exploit out of the land. There's also the realization that if they can keep the Arctic ice-free, according to their writings, then that would begin to have an effect on the land ice, and basically they believed that they would begin to be able to change the climate of the northern hemisphere, so that they would release large tracts of land, huge tracts of land. A large part of the northern hemisphere is icebound. So you've got Scandinavia, the whole of Russia, Alaska, Canada, that they would like to change the climate, warm it up a little bit. And we know that it doesn't take that much to warm it, because there were Vikings living in Greenland during the medieval warm period, up to 6,000 living there for 400 years. So obviously the climate was warmer, it was more palatable, they had no advantages of electrical, modern technology, so they were using their skills and had trees, and basically the climate was warmer, so it was more beneficial, and basically that's what they want to try and return it to. But of course that would be very politically dangerous, because if they did manage to fulfill their plans, then there would be a lot of devastation around the world. The climates would change, the southern hemisphere would suffer changes in the monsoon winds, they would lose a lot of rain, there would be a lot of problems and a lot of backlash, and basically they had to kind of find a way they could legitimize what they wanted to do, so that they could go ahead and do it covertly and come out of it on top without being accused of damaging the planet and having all these other nations in a very bad way. So that cover is climate change. The threat of climate change is giving them a license to begin geoengineering. That's their cover. But of course we now know from all those historical papers, we look at what changes have happened in the Arctic region, it's apparent that they began this in the 60s, and they've been developing it. In fact, if we look at some of the suggestions for warming the climate, warming the Arctic region in particular, Julian Huxley said in 1946, who was the head of UNESCO at the time, to use a series of nuclear detonations. Well, that in fact actually happened, because the Soviets detonated 135 nuclear bombs, one of which was the most powerful bomb that's ever been detonated on the planet. So they've been experimenting. There have been other suggestions about spraying coloured particles, spraying carbon black, about increasing cloud cover to trap warmer air in underneath. There's been all kinds of suggestions, even to build a dam across the Bering Strait and then have a series of nuclear power stations pumping in the warmer Pacific Ocean to warm up the sea in the Pacific, the Arctic Basin. So there's been all kinds of suggestions, and if people do their research, you will understand at what levels we're talking about. We're talking presidential level, from Eisenhower through to Nixon, all of them, even JFK, talking at the United Nations in 1961 about all nations working together to accurately predict and one day control the weather. All the cues that we need to understand, or the clues, are written in open source material. This isn't top secret information. And if you study what they suggested, and then observe or look to scientific observations about what is currently going on, it's an incredible coincidence that it happens to be in line with what they were suggesting. When you've got NASA confirming that there's been a 20-year linear increase in cloud cover, in the Arctic region. That's perfectly in line with what Fletcher suggested in 1965 with increasing cloud cover in the polar basin. And there have been people in 1970 who talked about using contrails for weather modification. Towards the end of his particular paper, suspecting that what they were talking about at the National Science Foundation was already taking place. So you've got a scientist from Alaska observing what's happening in the polar basin, actually writing in his paper that he suspects that they're already beginning their weather modification techniques to warm the polar basin in 1970.